We've been talking lately about the 3rd century AD, a period that many historians think of as a crisis. I largely agree with these views. As we saw last time, coinage debasement created instability in the monetary system. The rise of usurpers and short-lived emperors created political instability, and while some regions of the Roman Empire certainly carried on as though nothing was going on, Italy, Western Europe, Asia Minor, and the Near East were definitely experiencing a very real crisis. What we haven't done yet is go through the tangled play-by-play of events. And while we aren't going to talk about all 30 to 40 emperors and usurpers that took power or tried to take power during this 50 years, we're going to hit the highlights. Or should we call them the lowlights? The political crisis of the 3rd century on this episode of the Pax Romana podcast. Episode 74, The Collapse of the Roman Peace. Hi folks, thanks for listening to this episode of the Pax Romana podcast. The podcast is now well over 1,000 subscribers. Thanks so much for making the podcast a success, for signaling to me that you're interested in the content by subscribing, or by liking the podcast, or by leaving a comment. And if you haven't already, tell a friend or a family member about the podcast. There's enough of a back catalog now that they can begin listening to episode 1 and get over an audiobook's worth of Roman history content. There are lots of people out there that are looking for great podcasts and they don't know about this one. So please let them know what you're listening to and keep letting me know what you think as well. It's likely that once we finish with the 3rd century crisis, I'm going to go ahead and do a series on listener questions that I've accumulated over the last year or so. And if you have friends or family members that have questions about the Roman Empire or Roman history, feel free to leave those as comments. Send me an email at colin@paxromanapodcast.com or contact me on X. Anyway, thanks again for listening. Let's go ahead and get to today's episode. In AD 235, Severus Alexander was killed by his own troops while campaigning in Germania. The Peace of Commodus had finally worn off 50 years later, and now, basically until the end of the Western Roman Empire, there will be a steady stream of Germanic and Celtic peoples coming into the Roman Empire across either the Danube or the Rhine River, often both at the same time. Severus Alexander's death, along with that of his mother, in 235 marked the beginning of the crisis of the 3rd century. This was a period of 50 years, 235 to 284 AD, in which the vast majority of Rome's emperors were murdered, killed in battle, or otherwise died violent deaths. The average length of time any emperor was in power was just shy of 18 months. There were over 20 legitimate, recognized emperors and countless other usurpers, local rulers, or rebels. None of these emperors or usurpers were able to establish a legitimate succession, dynasty. Hence, there was ongoing civil war and political uncertainty for this entire 50-year period. As a result, the Roman Empire fragmented. Regions looked to local rulers, to generals, elites, in some cases, even the chieftains of foreign tribes for protection in a world that had suddenly lost any semblance of order. The foreign tribes that began coming into the Roman Empire did not respect Roman gods or Roman traditions. We know from one source, the Vienna fragment of a work called the Sithica, written in the middle of the 3rd century, that those invading the Roman Empire were after plunder. This is what that fragment says, quote, "The invaders laid waste to Thrace and Macedonia and plundered the entire countryside therein. And then, making an assault upon the city of the Thessalonians, they tried to capture it as a close-packed band. But since those on the walls defended themselves valiantly, warding off the battle columns with the assistance of many hands, and none of the Scythians' hopes came to pass, they abandoned the siege. The prevailing opinion of the host was to make for Athens and Achaia, envisioning the gold and silver votive offerings and the many processional goods in the Greek sanctuaries, for they learned that the region was exceedingly wealthy in this respect. And like I said, that's the Vienna fragment. There aren't a lot of reliable literary sources from this period. Many of the accounts that survive are like this one. It's not quite drums in the deep, but these are still nevertheless the writings of a people that were under siege by vast hordes, willing to plunder even holy sites, temples, sanctuaries, to steal offerings, to melt down statues. The things that the people of the Roman Empire held sacred were being looted, even from parts of the Roman Empire once thought completely secure. Places like Macedonia and Greece, these are internal Roman provinces. Many of these invaders were coming from the Eurasian steppe, a strip of largely open grassland populated by nomadic peoples, about 5,000 miles in length, stretching from just north of Greece all the way to Mongolia, with a few mountain range breaks in between. But it was the people of the steppe that were placing pressure then on the Celtic and Germanic peoples in Europe, pushing those people into Roman territory. The emperor that initially took over for Alexander Severus, who had to stop this invasion, was Maximinus Thrax, and he was made emperor directly by his soldiers. Maximinus was a commander in Alexander Severus's army. He was probably a Thracian. He was not a member of the Senate or the equestrian class. He effectively seems to have had a peasant background. But now, with so much going wrong in the Roman Empire, military might and the ability to command troops was more important for ruling than the skills that traditional aristocrats had brought to the office. Maximinus Thrax was confirmed by the Senate and acknowledged by the Praetorians as emperor, but he faced several assassination attempts in his short 3-year reign. One of the things that probably helped him is that he never went to the city of Rome. Ever. Never. He stayed for the 3 years of his reign on the northern frontier, fighting back invading tribes. For Maximinus, Rome was essentially a piggy bank, and he did not see Rome's aristocratic class as key advisors or partners in government, but as sources of revenue for the soldiers. We are told by the Greek historian Herodian, quote, "It was possible every day to see men who yesterday had been rich, today being reduced to paupers. So great was the avarice of the tyrant, who pretended to be ensuring a continuous supply of money for the soldiers. He turned to the public treasuries. All the funds which had been collected for the citizens' welfare or for gifts, all the funds being held in reserve for shows or festivals, he transferred to his own personal fortune. The offerings which belonged to the temples, the statues of the gods, the tokens of honor of the heroes, the decorations on public buildings, the adornments of the city, in short, any material suitable for making coins, he handed over to the mints." That's Herodian, Book 7. It's ironic, isn't it? After having read to you tales of barbarians marching into Greece and melting down what they found in the temples there, to read that Rome's own protector and emperor was doing the same thing. So if Romans were not facing threats from outside the Roman Empire, they were dealing with threats from inside the Roman Empire, and sometimes at the same time. What an incredibly difficult time to be alive. Imagine what it must have been like for a Roman who was in his 50s or 60s, born in the last days of the Pax Romana, where things weren't great, but certainly were nothing like this. It probably seemed like the world was ending. And for many senators, this was an absolutely intolerable situation. There was increasing dissatisfaction in a very short time within the Roman Senate. Maximinus Thrax was seen as little better than a barbarian by many members of the Roman Senate, but there was almost nothing they could do apart from endorsing other men to be emperor. And so we begin to see the fragmentation already just 3 years later in AD 238. The Senate that year declared Maximinus Thrax a public enemy. Maximinus, who was to the north of Italy, decided to turn his army around, stop fighting the Germanic peoples, and march on Rome. The Senate, meanwhile, sent word to one of their number who lived in Africa, a man named Gordian. Gordian, however, was around 80 years old, certainly not in fighting shape. And so Gordian accepted the Senate's offer to be named emperor and also made his son, also called Gordian, we'll call him Gordian II, as co-emperor at the same time. The province neighboring Africa was called Numidia, and the governor of that province was loyal to Maximinus Thrax, not so much because he liked Maximinus, but because he did not like the Gordian family. They had a personal grudge between them. And so the governor of Numidia decided to take up the cause of Maximinus, marching his legion towards Carthage. And the Gordians, who had the endorsement of the Senate, but not an army, could at best raise a militia against these trained soldiers moving in from the west. In the battle that followed, the younger Gordian, Gordian II, was killed. And when his father, Gordian I, already a very old man, heard of the death of his son, he decided to commit suicide. So Maximinus Thrax, without having to lift a finger himself, managed to take out two of his rivals in 238. Still in that year, the Senate tried again. They appointed two members of the Senate in Rome as co-emperors. But the population of Rome did not want to be ruled by senators, and they began rioting in the city. The Roman Senate, in an effort to appease the population, appointed another Gordian to lead them. This is the grandson of Gordian. So now we have Gordian III already in the same year. So we have four emperors already at this point, not including the two that have died in 238. You can kind of see how this became so chaotic so quickly. So Gordian III, just 11 years old, by the way, was ruling in Rome, and Maximinus Thrax was moving down into Italy from the north. On his way down, he ran into the prosperous city of Aquileia in the north of Italy. This city had declared for Gordian III and the two senatorial emperors. And so Maximinus decided to make a pit stop and besiege the city, probably in the hopes of looting it to pay for soldiers. But the Aquileians had built a large wall and were able to hold off Maximinus's army. At this point, Maximinus's own soldiers became impatient, and they decided to make an executive decision and murder their own emperor and general Maximinus along with his son. The army then surrendered to the Roman Senate, who granted the soldiers an amnesty for killing Maximinus Thrax. So now Rome is back down to just 3 emperors in the year 238, but you might not be surprised to know that that was not going to last. You can't just have 3 emperors in a period of chaos like this. So you have 2 senatorial emperors and an 11-year-old boy, all emperors. The Praetorian Guard decided to take it upon themselves to make a decision. The Praetorian Guard and the Senate never quite got along. There was much more chance that the Praetorian prefect would be able to influence an 11-year-old boy as opposed to 2 aged senators. So, of course, the Praetorians stormed the imperial palace in late July or early August, murdered the 2 senatorial co-emperors, and now, at least for the year 238, the young Gordian III was in charge of the Roman Empire alone. In the years that followed, the Praetorian prefect effectively ruled the Roman Empire along with Gordian's mother. But Gordian's empire was by no means unified. There was a revolt back in his home province of Africa in 240. Germanic tribes continued to cross the Rhine and Danube, terrorizing the northern provinces. And the new rulers of Persia, the Sassanids, encroached into Roman territory in the east. The young emperor decided to take his armies along with his Praetorian prefect over to the Near East to face the Sassanian threat. They achieved some success recapturing key cities near the Euphrates River, but unfortunately for Gordian, during the campaign, his Praetorian prefect became ill and died. And the new Praetorian prefect, a man named Philip, was proclaimed emperor in 244 after the young Gordian was assassinated, either by his own troops or by agents working for Philip. Philip sued for peace with the Sassanians, giving himself a brief reprieve on the Eastern Front, and then hightailed it back to Rome in order to secure power at the center of the empire, assess the various threats to his rule, both domestic and foreign, and then make an attempt at establishing himself as emperor. By the end of 244, Philip made it back to Rome, was recognized by the Senate, but faced continuing challenges because by this point the Roman currency had been completely debased. Many senators had either lost their lives or their livelihoods. The food supply of Rome and other cities were in severe shortages, and a state of fear and chaos reigned in much of the empire. Amidst this dismal situation, Rome celebrated its 1000th anniversary from its founding. I wonder what it was like to hold games in the city of Rome, to hold festivals, to pretend that everything was okay. Meanwhile, so many in the population were probably thinking the same thing, that Rome's best days were behind it, and that the future was unknown and very uncertain. It's around this time that many Roman inscriptions to the gods and goddesses bear a new phrase, pro salute imperii, save the Roman system. To me, this suggests that people realized that it was not just their city or their region that was in trouble, but the entire Roman Empire was collapsing. And so their cries to the gods were desperate and totalizing. However, as we'll see in the next episode, rather than sending help, the gods sent the Romans about the worst thing imaginable, a deadly pestilence, the plague of Cyprian, a disease on par with the Antonine Plague, which struck under Marcus Aurelius at the very end of the Pax Romana. Only now this pestilence would find Rome in a much weaker state. And so while Romans were celebrating the 1000th birthday of the city, drinking, attending gladiatorial games, paying tribute to the gods in the hope of salvation, dealing with civil war, foreign war, famine, military infidelity, they were now about to add pestilence to their list of woes. We'll talk about what happened on the next episode of the Pax Romana podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Pax Romana podcast. For more information, including a list of primary sources and further reading, check the show notes. Music by Red Productions and Exocore. Follow Professor Colin Elliott on X at ProfCPE or email colin@paxromanapodcast.com. Listen to more episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or just about anywhere podcasts are available. Stay tuned for the next episode of the Pax Romana podcast.